Hi, welcome to Redgate University. I'm Steve Jones from Redgate Software and SQL Server Central, and I'm here to talk to you about unboxing SQL Clone. Now, SQL Clone is a product we have to allow you to virtualize your databases and provide dev test environments, customer server environments in a quick and easy way where you save a lot of disk space, but more importantly, you have a tremendous amount of agility because it works so quickly. So there's an article on the product learning section of Redgate Hub from Fill Factor that looks at unwrapping, unboxing, and installing SQL Clone. It's a great article. I recommend it. It has a lot of details in it. I think it can be a little complex for just getting started and going through the first setup. So in this video, I want to summarize some of what's in that article, explain to you how to get set up kind of quickly, and show you how SQL Clone works. Now, the architecture of SQL Clone is somewhat hard to explain at times. This is from the article from Fill Factor where it shows we have an original database on a SQL Server instance. There's this SQL Clone server, there's a PowerShell, there's a console, there's file share. There's all sorts of items in here. This actually makes perfect sense, but it's a little bit hard to understand at first. So I've got a simpler diagram. This is one of the original architecture diagrams that we used to use. In this case, you can see in the upper right-hand side, there is a SQL Server instance that's a terabyte of data. It's this SRV dev SQL 2 server. And then you'll notice that in the middle, there's a SQL Clone server. Now, the SQL Clone server is just a SQL Server process or database that contains configuration information, and then a service that does a little bit of management, but it could be combined with anything else we have. Today, we're going to combine that instance with the original instance that has the database on it. And then we'll also combine it with the client on the left-hand side, on the upper side, where we deploy out these copies of the databases. Now you'll notice at the bottom there's a file share, and this is where some of the magic of SQL Clone comes in, that we store off an image that's similar to what we do with a Docker container image. And we've got this read-only version of all of our database, and all of our data, I guess. And then we'll deploy out a difference file and an instance of this database with very little disk space and allow a client to use this just like it was that full-size database. We do it very, very quickly, and we can deploy these copies on demand. So today, I'm going to have all of this on one machine. I'm actually going to use a virtual machine because it's already running on my laptop, and I want to show you the installation. But we will have kind of the source SQL Server database, the deployed clones, the file share, and then the management all on one machine. And that's how most people get started, and that's what I want to show you how to do today. So to get started, there are a few things we're going to need. So we do need Windows hosts, and the requirement for SQL Clone is that they're either Windows 7 or 2008 R2 or later. In this case, I've got a 2016 server instance that I've set up with, obviously it's a Windows machine, and it will function as the management server as well as the client. And note, we do need the VSS service so that we can get that consistent copy of the database. For the SQL Server, we need 2008 or later. In this case, I've installed, I believe, 2017, where I'll be using it. And it will host the configuration database, the source database, as well as the cloned databases all in the same machine. And then we'll need a file share where we store these images. There are a few other requirements, some .NET requirements, TLS, various things. They are documented on our documentation site, so you can link to that and check it out. So let's get started with this. So as I've said, I've got a Windows Server and a SQL Server instance, so let me show you those. So I've got a Windows Server instance here, and there is a SQL Server instance running right now, and it is version 2017. And there is a source database here. So I've copied the Wide World Importer sample database here, and we'll count this as a production database, and we're going to make copies for our developers using SQL Clone. So that's already there. So let me check that one off so I know what we've done here. We've got the SQL Server instance. So let's get our SQL Clone software. So if I go, and I want to use Chrome here, and there it is. It's a brand new machine, so the indexing can be slightly slow. I'll go to the Redgate site, and on the Redgate site I can download anything I want. We provide you evaluations of all of our software. So I'll go to the product section. In this case, I know I want SQL Clone. So I can pick this download button, and that'll take me to a quick form where I can enter some information. If you're already a customer and you have your account, you can say, I just want to download her and avoid all this. but let's do this. And there's my famous Denver cab phone number that I use everywhere. And we'll call me a senior one, and technology, and that's our company. Now I know you can join SimpleTalk here, and SimpleTalk has some fantastic articles to help you learn, as well as SQL Server Central if you want to do that. I actually am already a member of SimpleTalk, so I don't need another set of emails every week. So you can see that the download for SQL Clone is very quick. Downloaded in just a few seconds. It's about 30-some megabytes, I think. And we'll get ready to run this. Before I do that though, there's a couple other things I need to do, so I'm going to stop right there. So we do have the SQL Clone software. Since this is running on my system, I need some service accounts. Now in the architecture, there's this management server that needs its service account. And there's also an agent that runs for each developer or on each machine where I'm going to run SQL Server and deploy these clone instances. So I need some service accounts. So I actually need two here. One should be for my management server, and one will be for my agent. It's a good idea to have these as domain accounts. In this case, I have one machine, so they'll just be a local account. I also need to add these to SQL Server because they will actually do the creation and removal of databases on the SQL Server system. So let's add those. So I've got computer management here, and I've got my users. Let's add a new one. So I like to keep service accounts in a format that makes sense to me. So often I'll use something like SQL Clone because I'm using the SQL Clone service. Or if I was doing SQL Server, I might say SQL Server, just so for me as a developer, I know what exactly this is doing. I don't need a description, but I do need a password. And I usually don't expire these passwords on my local machine because I need them for services. So that'll be for my management server. And then I want an agent account. I could use the same account, especially for an evaluation, just because I may do something different later or move this management server. I often do keep them separate. So again, we'll create that. And I've got two accounts there. Now I want to add those to SQL Server as well. So let's come and add new logins. And it's a Windows one. We want to make this a sysadmin because it will be doing sysadmin responsibilities. And of course, maybe I mistyped something there. I think that's the correct name. What did I name that thing? SQL Clone, MGMT. I should think I'd find that. It is there. Clone Unbox, that's the wrong one. So we'll create that one. And then I do need to add the agent as well in this case. I don't need it there, I need it here. SQL Clone agent. Let's just double check this. It is sysadmin. All right. So the agents actually do a lot of the work, and they're set up. So that is done, and they're added to SQL Server, so we'll check those off. And the last thing I need is this file share location. All of the agents that connect to my SQL Server to get new databases from SQL Clone will have to read most of the data from this file share location, and then they'll actually create a small difference disk on the local SQL Server instance host. But they do need a place for that central location. In general, we recommend a file share that has very good networking connectivity to all of your SQL Server instances. But in this case, we're doing it on a local machine, so we just need a space on that machine. So on my C drive, I'm going to put a new folder, and I'm going to call it SQL Clone Images. And that'll be the location where I actually want to store things as I create both my images, and then I use those to deploy this system. So that gives me a standard path, and if I uninstall SQL Clone or I decide to move it, then I know I can delete everything in this folder. So I think that's all that's left on our list. So let's install SQL Clone. So if I come back to my system here and minimize some of these items, I've got the installation program. We can run that and it'll run fairly quickly and get moving. You have the option when you run this to actually add your license key and activate the software. I won't do that today, I'll just leave it as an evaluation, which is something you can do with all of our software. So this should only take a few minutes and then we'll get to configuration dialog. It goes fairly quickly because this is a fairly simple process. We're just installing some services and the needed XEs and DLLs that will run those, and then adding a few items that will be needed in the services applet, etc. By the way, SQL Clone will also upgrade itself over time. You'll get a message that says there's a new update, and you can just click update from either an agent or the management server, and it will actually kind of update itself and then refresh without you actually having to run another install program, which I think is a fantastic way of implementing product updates over time. So SQL Clone is installed, and then we should get the configuration dialog. Now it does want me to log into the Redgate site and it will check for a license, but you can see it's activated a trial as soon as I logged into the Redgate site, and I've got 14 days left. Certainly if you need more time, you can contact sales and ask for more time. What I'll do is I'm just going to continue this trial, and then I'm going to go through the setup. So the SQL Server name is the local one, and let's make sure I have the right name. So it's Clone Unbox here. And then the domain username would be that one that I actually created. So it was SQL Clone Management, and the password is there. And then it'll create this database. So if I've typed that password correctly, and I haven't, but let's do this. We should have the clone server actually create a database and configure the service account to actually run correctly. So this is the management server that's going to work with the management databases. The agent service and the agent account works with the user databases. So this has been created. I'm going to put in my user account here that I use for Windows. I should be an admin. It should work, I hope. Let's try that password. That's a better password apparently. We won't save that. And I have the SQL Clone GUI now running. You can see up here at the top that I have a trial running. I have 14 days remaining. I can activate it and enter a password or buy or call somebody or something else. I'm going to say ask me later. And you can see that I have the no images, no clones right now. I've got a number of links and I've got the welcome screen here. Before I go any further, if I go over to my SQL Server instance and I look at this, here is the management service database that has all of the information about SQL Clone inside of it. We typically won't interact with this at all. We'll just work with other systems. But for now, let's get started. So you'll notice when I go here, it asks me to install an agent. An agent is what actually interacts with SQL Server and will move my data around. So let's download our agent. And again, you can see it's a very small executable. We'll run that. And this will install the agent on my desktop, my workstation, or my SQL Server instance host, which could be separate from where I've installed SQL Clone. So we'll set up the agent. Now the Windows user account here, this will be that agent that I created. In this case, I would use an agent for each user, or maybe for all my users, but I would have this as a separate account. The management user runs the management service, which is kind of that central machine. So let's type in a password and we'll set up this agent. Aha, so the local agent does need local administrator privileges, which I didn't grant. So let's do that now. So in our administrators group, we will add SQL Clone agent. And now we can install that agent. I believe this is local administrator privileges because this is a privileged account that interacts with the file shares as well as SQL Server. And so we want to be sure that it can actually accomplish anything on the Windows host that it needs to. Once this runs, then I'll be able to start creating images and deploying out SQL Clone databases. So the agent has completed its setup, and now we are actually ready to go. So the next step would be to create an image and then start cloning it. So let's create an image. The way that this works is either from a backup file or an actual database on a SQL Server. and we will make a copy of all that data and put it into an image file that we can then use to deploy. In this case, I'm going to start with a SQL Server, and I'm going to do the local machine here, which is this clone unbox. SQL Clone will then make sure that we're authorized to use this, and then I can pick the database. In this case, I'm going to start with that wide world importers, and I want to make a copy of this. I have the ability to modify this image as I'm making copies. So typically this would be for doing some sort of data masking or some sort of changes that would alter my production data before it goes to developers. In this case, I'm not going to do any data masking. We have plenty of other videos in Redgate University to help you learn about data masking if that's what you'd like to do. So I'm going to skip those modifications, and then I'm going to put my file share location in. So in this case, I created that folder on my C drive, so I'm going to copy that URL. In SQL Clone, we do warn you if it's not a share that's accessible by networked machines, so I get this warning. In this case, I'm going to allow this to continue because I'm just testing for my local work. Now I have to give my image a name, and so I'm going to say wide world importers base, and I like to give these a date often so I know when it was created. So let's do 12/19, it's just today, and I'll create that image. Now SQL Clone will do that for me, and while that's running, I actually get the option here to look at a little tour. So if I look through that, I'll find out that I have my dashboard where I can see an overview of my entire installation. I can see a summary of the images and clones and how many might be offline or online. I then get a recent activity area which logs the things that have happened in my installation. In this case, the only thing that's happened is creating that image, and you can see that that's in progress now. I have the ability to get a report of what kind of disk usage I have, so I can see the images or the locations or the instances listed down below. And then I can certainly search at the top, which is a very fantastic feature. My menu is over on the right-hand side, and in general, I can shrink that down if I would like to do that. So while this is being created, let's look at that location very quickly. You shouldn't have to look at this, but you can see that we've created this long file name here, which tells me this is where that image is being stored. And what we're essentially doing in this location is creating a virtual hard disk that we will mount for SQL Server to use as a location. Because we're using the Microsoft virtual hard disk technology, multiple instances or multiple processes can actually connect to this file and use it all at once. Once the image is created, this will be a complete copy of all the data in my database. So it's not necessarily the full size of the file from the source, but it is definitely all of the data. In this case, I believe the wide world importers is about a 4 gig-ish database. So I'll have a 4 gig file here. But when I deploy my copies out to the various instances for developers or automated processes, those will only use a tiny amount of space. In general, it's between 50 and 70-ish megabytes on each machine that's in use. Even though SQL Server will see the full 4 gigabytes or 4 terabytes or whatever the original size is. This is a slightly slow process, so we do provide you with PowerShell interfaces to make this work. And so if I go over to the settings menu and I look down, you'll see there's a PowerShell item, and it has some sample code in there as well as a download link for all the command lines. In general, once you get comfortable using SQL Clone and you want to have repeatable processes occurring on a regular basis, you'll want to do that with PowerShell. Now I got the message that that was actually created, and I can see that down in my view area, I'm looking at images by location. In my SQL Clone images folder, I have one image. And I can certainly look at this by clones by instance or images by source or whatever I want to do. So let's go look at this image, and you can see that it says it's actually a 1 gig image, even though I believe SQL Server sees it's a 4 gig file, but there are no clones created. If I go back over to my management studio and let's refresh this so we can see I still just have wide world importers, and I look at the properties for this, it does say it's a 4 gig database, but there's almost 2.5 gig free, so that makes sense. So let's create a clone. Now, just like I can modify the source database when I create the image, I could modify the image when I create the clone. There are certain things that I might want to do whenever I deploy one of these to a developer. So I can certainly create a template that has a set of modifications in there, SQL scripts or other changes, and apply those. I'm not going to do that to get started. Pick a destination where I want to deploy a new database. As I'm doing this just all in one machine, we'll use this local machine. We'll then give it a name. So I'm going to call it WBI Dev Steve, so it's my own one. And you'll see when I create this, it only takes a few seconds. On average, I think it's less than 10 seconds to typically create this clone. And then what will happen is SQL Server will see a new database that looks like that full-size database. So that was completed. And let's refresh our system, and I can see this database. And if I look at this, I know the screen is a little bit small here, but it looks like that still 4 GB database. When in reality, what it's actually going to be using is much less than that. So if I go to the image itself, you can see that's a 1 GB image. This is 44 megabytes for this database. But it's a real database. So if I look at one of the tables in this database, and I'm actually going to have to look because I have not worked with wide world importers in a while. Let's do application.cities. If I execute this, I see a bunch of data in there. Okay, so in this case, there's 37,940 rows. This is completely independent. I could certainly create my own table here. And I've got this table now that I can look at, and there's no data in it. But that is completely separate from the source database, or my production database here. That table doesn't exist in this database. And so I can completely now work with other developers, work with other systems, and access this database like it was the original database, do all the development work I want to. And then if I want to get rid of it, I can get rid of it. If I want to reset it, I can reset it. For example, this little button will do a reset. And it'll actually then return that user database to the state it was in when we first created it by going back to the wide world importer's base image and then resetting it. And so once this is done, if I look at my database now and I execute that statement, my table is gone because I've reset the image. And if I have another developer that I want to give access to this image, for example, if I do a Kendra, I can create a separate database for her in another 5, 6, 7 seconds, and then she can work independently as well. And I can deploy these to any SQL Server where I actually have an agent running, and I have access to do so. And that failed for some reason. Well, that's interesting. I think I typed something incorrectly there, but it would still work. And so I have the ability to play around with these instances as I need to do them. So I'd urge you to give SQL Clone a chance, do an evaluation, install it all on your laptop, just a couple service accounts and a file share location, and you'll be able to get started and then see what the power of SQL Clone can be in your environment. If you have more questions, please feel free to contact us at Redgate. Look for more courses at Redgate University for SQL Clone and all of our products, and hopefully you've enjoyed learning more about SQL Clone today and how you might unbox and get started.